Mark Johnson walked into the restaurant with the kind of quiet presence that rarely drew attention unless someone was looking for it. He wasn't dressed in a suit or polished shoes. No three-piece set, no silk tie, just a plain black t-shirt that fit him comfortably, a pair of slightly faded jeans and clean white sneakers. He didn't need to impress anyone with what he wore. To him, comfort mattered more than pretense. But in a world quick to judge, his choice of clothing would become the excuse some people needed to decide he didn't belong. The restaurant was one of those modern, glass-fronted establishments that carried itself like a palace of taste. The polished marble floors reflected soft golden light. Every waiter moved briskly, holding trays as though they carried treasure. Couples sat upright in crisp shirts and dresses, murmuring over wine glasses. It was the kind of place that liked to remind you, without ever saying it out loud, that not everyone was welcome. Mark walked toward the host's podium where the manager stood. The man was tall, with slicked-back hair, a dark blazer that looked like it had been tailored for him, and the kind of sharp jawline that matched the arrogance in his eyes. His glance moved up from Mark's sneakers, lingered on his jeans, and finally settled on the t-shirt with a slow, almost theatrical disapproval. The smirk that crossed his face was small but loaded. "Evening," Mark said, calm and polite. His voice was low and steady. The manager didn't return the courtesy. Instead, he tilted his head and asked, "Are you lost?" Mark frowned slightly. "Lost?" he repeated. "Yes," the manager said, as if it were obvious. "This is a fine dining establishment. Dress code, standards, atmosphere. I'm not sure this is what you're looking for." His eyes flicked back down to Mark's clothes, scanning him like a security guard might scan a trespasser. Mark's chest rose slowly, his breath measured. Years of these subtle and not-so-subtle dismissals had hardened him against reacting in the way they expected. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He let the man's words hang in the air, heavy, enough for the nearby guests to hear. A couple standing behind Mark in line shifted uncomfortably. They were dressed in evening wear, the man in a blazer, the woman in a cocktail dress, and their eyes darted between the manager and Mark. The tension was unmistakable, but they said nothing. Silence had a way of deepening humiliation. "I'd like a table," Mark said simply, still polite. The manager chuckled under his breath, the kind of laugh meant to humiliate. "Sir, I don't think you understand. This isn't casual dining. We don't seat just anyone who walks in off the street. Especially not—" He stopped himself before finishing the sentence, but the pause was enough. Everyone knew what he meant. Mark's jaw tightened. He didn't move, didn't step away. He met the manager's gaze, unblinking. "Are you refusing to seat me because of my clothes?" The manager shrugged, spreading his hands as if it were out of his control. "We have standards. Patrons who respect the space respect themselves enough to dress appropriately. You clearly don't." His tone sharpened on the last word, almost dripping with disdain. At that moment, a waitress passed by carrying menus. She glanced at Mark, her eyes softening briefly, but she kept walking. Another server near the bar paused mid-step, his gaze lingering. They all knew what they were seeing, but years of hierarchy had taught them to keep quiet. Mark stayed calm. "Is that so?" he said quietly. The manager leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice but not enough that others couldn't overhear. "Look, I'm trying to save you the embarrassment. This isn't your kind of place. There's a diner 2 blocks down. Much more fitting." That word, fitting, cut deeper than any raised voice could have. It wasn't about clothes. It was about belonging. It was about skin. The people nearby shifted again, trying to look anywhere but at the scene unfolding. Mark stood still, his silence carrying more weight than anger ever could. He could have pulled out his phone right then and there. He could have called someone, demanded recognition, but instead he let the insult grow. He let it play out because it was important for everyone to see the raw ugliness of prejudice when it felt safe to expose itself. The manager cleared his throat, growing impatient. "Sir, I'll have to ask you to leave." He gestured toward the door, the motion sharp, final. Mark didn't move. Instead, he slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. He laid it on the podium gently, almost casually, like someone setting down a napkin. "Before you tell me where I belong," he said, his voice steady, "you might want to read this." The manager frowned, his eyes flicking to the paper with annoyance. He picked it up and scanned the first line, then the header. His face drained, of color. The words were clear. Franchise Ownership Agreement. The signature at the bottom carried weight no one in the room could deny. The name beneath it was bold, unmistakable. Mark Johnson. For a long moment, silence blanketed the restaurant. The couple who had been watching leaned in, whispering in disbelief. The waitress who had passed by earlier froze, her eyes wide. The server at the bar set down his tray with a clatter, and the manager, the man who had laughed, who had dismissed, who had insulted, stammered, his lips moving, but no words forming. You're... His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "This must be... some mistake." Mark's expression didn't change. He simply reached forward, retrieved the document, folded it neatly, and slid it back into his pocket. Then he leaned, in just enough for the manager to feel the weight of his words. Respect isn't about clothes. It isn't about skin. It's about character. And today, you showed yours. The words sliced through the air, sharper than any raised voice could have. The manager opened his mouth again, desperate to salvage dignity, but nothing came. His arrogance had collapsed, and all that remained was shame. Mark stepped past him, walking with calm confidence. The waitress who had glanced at him earlier stepped forward nervously. "Right this way, sir," she said, her voice trembling, with a mix of respect and apology. She led him to a table near the center of the dining room. As he sat down, all eyes followed him. The couple whispered louder now, the man shaking his head. "He owns the place," the woman murmured, almost in awe. The staff whispered among themselves, words spreading like fire. The man who had been written off, dismissed as someone unworthy, was in fact the man who had power over every paycheck in the room. Mark sat quietly, unfolding the napkin on his lap, his movements deliberate and calm. He didn't need to boast, didn't need to wave his ownership papers around. The truth had already spoken louder than anything else could. The manager stood frozen at the podium, his face pale, his jaw clenched. For the first time in his career, he was the one who didn't belong. His prejudice had blinded him, and now the entire room had seen it exposed. The meal that followed was almost surreal. Waiters who had once ignored him now rushed forward, offering menus, pouring water, checking on him every few minutes. Guests kept stealing glances, whispering to one another. Every action, every whisper, every sideways look carried the weight of realization. Mark didn't bask in it. He didn't need to. For him, the moment wasn't about revenge. It was about revealing the truth. That prejudice is as fragile as it is cruel, and when confronted with reality, it collapses in on itself. When he finally stood to leave, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The manager looked down, unable to meet his eyes. The waitress gave him a small, genuine smile, one of quiet respect. And the couple who had witnessed everything watched him walk out the door, the weight of what they had seen settling in their minds. Mark Johnson had entered the restaurant as just another man in jeans and a t-shirt. He had been humiliated, dismissed, told he didn't belong. But he left as the owner, not just of the building, not just of the franchise, but of his own dignity, untouched by the prejudice that had tried to strip it from him. And for everyone who had witnessed it, the question lingered long after he was gone. How many times had they underestimated someone? How many times had hidden greatness been ignored, dismissed, or humiliated because of nothing more than skin color or clothing?